the third panel of our virtual conference. And the title of the panel is Funding Landscape Post-COVID. So I'm Prasenjit Mitra, for those of a couple of you who might have just joined in. I'm a professor at the College of Information Sciences and the director of the Center for Socially Responsible AI. And this is the conference, a virtual conference on AI in a post-COVID world. My co-host is Dr. Amulya Yadav, and he has been the workshop chair. He is in India, and it's quite late there now, so I will be handling this panel primarily on my own. To all our visitors here, thanks for joining in. A few announcements first. This panel is being recorded, and just so that people know, if there are issues, please let us know. We will try to adjust according to your needs, requirements. That's number one. Number two is, if you want to ask a question, please use the chat feature if you want the question to be seen by everyone. If you want to ask a question to the panelists privately, you can use the Q&A feature, and you can also raise your hand, in which case I will promote you to be a panelist, and then you can ask your question face to face. The reason we have done it this way in a webinar format is because of limitations of Zoom, and we have lost a substantial number of our attendees, primarily from India and China. I guess not only because of the hour, but because of the in the funding panel we have primarily people from the US, and so that is that. So with that, I will start by introducing the panelists who we have briefly, and then I will ask each of our panelists to please give an opening statement, tell us who you are, what you lead, and any thoughts about research and funding in a post-COVID world, with a focus perhaps on artificial intelligence, which is the theme of this virtual workshop. So our panelists today are in alphabetical order: Dr. Purush Iyer, Program Manager from the US Army Research Office; Dr. Henry Kautz, Division Director, Information and Intelligence Systems, National Science Foundation, and a professor at the Department of Computer Science. He's the founding director of Goergen Institute of Data Science at the University of Rochester. And Dr. Sophie Penney, who is the Director of Foundation Relations here at Penn State University. So with that, I will go over to Dr. Iyer. Please introduce yourself, your work, and any opening statements that you would like to make. Dr. Iyer.
Thank you, Prasenjit. I've been at Army Research Office for about 10 years now. I used to be a faculty at Penn State, and after that at NC State. Be as it may, when I came into to ARO, I started a program in network science, and also a division in network science, and also a program in AI. But it's been mostly in the area of decision aids. So right now, my funding interests are in algorithmic game theory, natural language processing, and I'm slowly thinking about getting into formal methods for AI systems. So the branch that I run has a couple of other people, one interested in information fusion and vision, and a third person interested in robotics, or essentially intelligent cyber-physical systems. Army Research Office is within the ecosystem of Army Research Lab. And AI is, of course, incredibly important to both the Army Research Lab and to all Army. So there's right now a big push to bring AI into all kinds of applications. In fact, something called the Army Futures Command was set up in Austin, a 4-star general headed command under which all of us sort of fall. So which sort of indicates how seriously Army is taking AI. Indeed, something called the Army, the AI task force has been set up. It operates out of CMU. And that is sort of one of the avenues which is funding university research from within the Army. So I also help with the Institute for Creative Technologies, which brings together Hollywood and Hollywood chops and AI at University of Southern California. And I also work with DARPA program managers. There are sort of various aspects that I get to see, or rather get ringside seats for. And then I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have. Over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Iyer. We will certainly have many questions. Our next speaker is Dr. Kautz.
Hi. So as was mentioned, I'm a rotator at National Science Foundation. My division, information and intelligent information systems. It's a fire stand for 3 years. I say that acronym so often that saying the actual name makes me stumble. So we have the mission of funding research in AI, data science, and human-computer interaction. Our overall budget's about $200 million a year, but I'm also involved in many what we call cross-cutting programs, where we bring in funding from across National Science Foundation and from other agencies. And the biggest activity I've been involved with is the National AI Institutes, which are now in their second year. We're about to announce in a few months the second year awards. As you probably all know, these are big interdisciplinary virtual centers. Each contains typically 3 to 5 different schools, and provides $20 million over 5 years for some theme related to AI. And some of them are foundational, such as foundations of machine learning. Others are more sector specific, such as AI and agriculture. So we are, we're very excited about what has been talked about, some of the plans that are going through Congress, just to say, we really need to make a major investment, of course, in science in general. Our science and engineering funding has simply not kept up with the growth of everything else in society, the population, the number of people going to school, and it certainly is fallen behind now China. And so the NSF budget has been essentially flat, just barely keeping up with inflation for I guess as long back as many of us can remember, like 3 administrations. So we hope to see will some version of the Endless Frontier Act come about? Will the budget really be increased 50%? We certainly think that's pretty critical for the country. We have so much good research. We have to, when we're asked by sometimes people from the House Science and Technology Committee come and and ask us, could we absorb more money? When we say, yeah, we're only, for AI in particular, we're only funding about 1/3 of our best proposals. So 2/3 of really strong work is going unfunded every year. So I guess that's for my introductory. If you'd like to go on to some of your questions, whatever. I didn't want to jump right ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Thank you. That's a good opening statement. We'll get into some of my questions and follow-ups on your comments. We'll maybe give Dr. Penney a chance to make an opening statement, and she has a different hat. So I'll let you introduce yourself and give us a few things to think about, Dr. Penney.
Here we go. I'm the one. Pick me, who had to unmute. Thank you so much. It's a wonderful opportunity to be with all of you today. You might wonder why a head of foundation relations is here, but we have worked closely with an array of offices across the university. Our office is a central unit in fundraising and development at Penn State University. For those of you who are from Penn State or maybe familiar with the institution, are aware that we have a footprint across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania with multiple campuses all over the state. There's a saying that no one is more than maybe about an hour or so from a campus of Penn State University. So our office is assisting all of those units at University Park as well as across the Commonwealth with thinking about fundraising from primarily independent private foundations, which include the larger national organizations that would come to your mind. In some cases, we are beginning to see some international organizations coming across our plates who we might be addressing or dealing with, or who are offering opportunities that may be of interest to our researchers. But we also work with regional and more local foundations as well too, that might be funding in Eastern or Western Pennsylvania or other areas. We offer an array of information and advice, doing research. We are always keeping our finger on the pulse of what's transpiring in the foundation world. And over the past year, I would say, in terms of my opening statement, that the past 14 months have taught us that it's not been just about COVID, but in fact about, as I think all of us know, much more than that. And one of the other presenters talked about the idea of interdisciplinarity. I will mention the idea of intersectionality and the fact that what we're discovering, and I think what many of us knew, but is being reinforced for us, is that we have both problems that are specific to groups and populations, areas of the country, or to specific issues such as the economy. But often these are related, and in fact, they are large, they're complex, and they do require both interdisciplinary and intersectional approaches. The other thing that I would say about that is given what we've seen transpire over the past 14 months, we've seen a revelation, I should say, on some people's parts. There were many who would argue it wasn't a revelation to them at all. But an uncovering and a holding up and out to people of the many issues that have been plaguing the world and our country for many decades, if not centuries. And so economic inequality, racial inequality, other sorts of issues that have come to the fore over the past year. COVID really served essentially, in my mind, as the opening of the Pandora's box that shed light on those things. And AI, in a number of cases, has been seen, I think, by some organizations anyway, that are forward thinking, but those who are also happen to be involved in technology in the field, as a potential solution or a potential tool to help move towards solutions for resolving some of these large, intractable intersectional issues. And so I'll stop there.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Penney. And she's too modest to say this, but so I'll add, the reason she's here is instead of having somebody from one foundation who is responsible for funding, we wanted to have somebody who looks at it from the other way and has a fascinating knowledge of many, many foundations and has been working in this area for a long time. So bringing that vision and knowledge in was important in this panel. So thank you for your time. So we'll go now into sort of the questions that I want to ask, and I would also welcome anyone in our audience to ask any questions they may have. So the first, and some of this, some of you have already touched upon it in your opening statement, is with respect to at least the AI centers. So the first question is, what opportunities or funding has already been put in place by your agency, and what would you want to see more of? So we'll go with Dr. Kautz.
Oh, okay. So sorry, Kautz. In 2020, NSF funded a lot of rapids. These are awards that we can turn around in less than a month. We had special pandemic relief funding for topics related to COVID-19, things like predicting disease spread, a lot of good work on data mining, the literature, help create these dashboards, human impacts of technology of remote work and schooling. So these are awards where that is to get a new project launched quickly in a matter of weeks rather than a year. The current funding priorities are to put some extra money, funding for researchers who are disproportionately impacted, for things like scientists whose labs were shut but still incurred expenses. But more generally, I think we'll see a lot of this money used over the next 2 years for new faculty, for things like our career awards. So these are faculty, their careers sort of were delayed by a year because in many cases their incoming students deferred admission, right? So it's sort of hampering their research output. I already mentioned the AI institutes, and if you look at what we've done, we have some really good partnerships, and our biggest is with the Department of Agriculture, very excellent centers, really bringing together expertise in AI and expertise in agriculture. And we'll have some other partnerships to announce soon. But I think the big white whale that everyone would love to have a partnership is with NIH, and really looking at AI for pandemic prediction and response. So lots of conversations going on, but nothing yet that's ready to announce.
Thank you. And sorry for the extra R. So thank you, Dr. Kautz. So yeah, we'll go to Dr. Iyer.
Okay, so we did not start anything major. We did not get any additional funding to put on COVID-related work. But what did happen within DoD that I saw, or at least within the Army, was the following. Clearly, COVID had a big impact on faculty being able to hire students, faculty being able to hire postdocs, and sometimes students not being able to go away on summer internships. So all these things sort of impacted, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, in the sense that some wanted to spend money much more quickly, and a lot of people really couldn't spend their money at all. So one of the things that happens within DoD is that we are held to very strict standards of disbursement. We have to make sure that the money is spent, at least 55% of the money allocated in a year is spent within that year, within that fiscal year. So this sort of places a lot of pressure on us. So we had to, we had to work with the generals who say, if you don't want to spend it, there's somebody else that I can spend it on. And they're pretty brutal about taking the money away. And at the same time, working with the faculty and students, so to say. So we had to keep both of them at bay. So, and we did that. There was sort of a lot of administrative details that we, administrative maneuvers that we had to employ to make sure of that. So that is one of the biggest things. Now, having said that, I really did not notice any change in the output of the faculty. Clearly, I think those that have wet labs are affected, were affected by the pandemic. But Zoom calls have been fantastic, and I think I found productivity to remain constant, and work is definitely happening. So even in a case like ICT, the Institute for Creative Technologies, where they have these incredibly fancy equipment, they've been able to sort of schedule around the clock, have sort of strict protocols, and still be able to make things happen. So overall, I mean, I think research has progressed without any delay, which is a big thing. So my colleagues from DARPA are here, and I don't mean to speak for them, but there are stories that I've heard and I've seen with my own eyes that I think are appropriate for this crowd that you guys, stories that you might want to listen and want to hear about. One of the things that's happened is that with contracts where there are delivery and there are sort of strict schedules, clearly I think everyone has saved money by not traveling, right? So, and some have incurred bigger costs. And I think with contracts, what I'm seeing is that the government has been a little bit more liberal, and they've tried to accommodate people who have had sort of extra costs. But again, I mean, these are decisions taken at agency level, but it's happened. So I think these are the main so bottom line, COVID hasn't really impacted research. It's gone on well. The negative aspect, well, I mean, a lot of people have been inconvenienced, but at the end of the day, they've still been able to continue their work. Over.
Yeah, thank you. So Dr. Penney, what opportunities or funding have you seen across foundations that have come across due to this pandemic? How have things changed in the philanthropic world, and what would you like to see more?
I'm happy to answer that question. So what I would say is I've seen some of the same things that the other two panelists mentioned, which is, in the initial stages of the pandemic, there was a focus on the disease, there was a focus on researchers and on budgets, and on ensuring that people were still able to do their work if they in fact were able to access their labs. So organizations were being more flexible with their funding, enabling people to either extend projects and other sorts of things. At the same time, early in the pandemic, the primary focus was, not surprisingly, on the pandemic itself, on the disease, on everything that could be done to help define solutions, both to determine whether somebody in fact was at risk, whether someone in fact had contracted the disease, and if they had, to be thinking about solutions like vaccines or other sorts of treatments. So we saw a lot of that activity in the opening months of the pandemic as that money began to be distributed and to be taken up by, often in cases, I will be honest, what I observe are larger institutions, larger organizations known for their research and their work. There began to be a shift in focus, and organizations began to think about the fact that those, particularly I would say, that are forward thinking, and in some cases those were technology focused organizations, we're starting to look at, so what's going to happen in the future? What happens when we come out of this, when the solution has been found? And we now find ourselves on the precipice of that, that time period. So even relatively early in the pandemic, some organizations were beginning to shift to more of a focus of AI and or funding for good, both with regard to, say, healthcare, but also many of the other issues that I talked about earlier, and how tools like AI could be employed to address them. So in particular, I would mention, for example, an organization called data.org, and some of you may be familiar with it, and I'll put a note in the chat about a competition that they ran last year, and it was called an Inclusive Growth and Recovery Challenge. The goal of that particular opportunity was to ensure that when we came into this recovery, which we're now just on the precipice of, that there were organizations thinking about how to use data, AI, et cetera, to ensure that there was greater equity in the recovery than had existed in the economy and in particular our country at this pre-pandemic. So in other words, as some organizations have put it, and one described it in a recent call for submissions, is to rebuild better in their minds. So that was one example. There are other organizations that I would say simply stayed the course, and those include organizations like the Alfred Sloan Foundation. So those who are familiar with it, and I will put a link in the chat as well there too, continue to do the work that they have always done, stayed the course. And while there were some concerns at the outset of the pandemic about the economy and what the impact might be on foundations and their ability to provide funding, what we discovered in our office is that funding was relatively stable. In fact, in some ways it was more stable, and we had a bit more opportunity to seek support for researchers in the virtual world in which we've been living than our fellow fundraisers who spend most of their time visiting individual donors and were restricted from going on the road. RFPs continue to be issued. There was, as I mentioned earlier, an increasing shift, and the data.org challenge was an example of that, towards thinking about equity and how programs or projects might engage and involve communities and community members in the identification of issues and problems, and in the identification of those solutions as well too. The other thing that I would mention is that there was a shift and a change on the part of a number of foundations in thinking about how they do their own work. Many of them, any number of them, are using AI, and there's been a lot of debate about the use of AI in philanthropy and philanthropy in general and how it's employed. And so there's been a pretty fierce debate over the last 14 months about that. And so a number of foundations have been shifting how they think about their work. They're looking for, as I mentioned, that engagement. They're also looking for more diverse groups of people to be at the helm of projects, or for institutions that are led by diverse teams of individuals, or programs or projects that are led by diverse teams. So that's been a really significant shift. There are a lot of proposals that we complete these days where we're being asked what the makeup is of the team, in some cases being asked for bios of the persons in the team. In some cases, organizations even want persons on the team who themselves have lived experience with whatever the problem is that they're trying to resolve. So this is very different from the sort of typical, you've got this scientific problem, you're going to research it and address it. It really is what's the issue for the community? How might you work with them to resolve it and collaborate with them, and then use AI as a tool to realize a solution that will have impact and benefit.
Yeah, thank you. So quick set of follow-ups on that round. Dr. Kautz, I think you mentioned about less than 1 month. I'm assuming that these are the rapid and eager grants.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. and rapids are even faster than Eagers. And yeah, so we had like a special amount of money that we were allocated in 2020 for COVID related rapids.
Right.
And I guess, you know, in terms of what the research results, I mean, I guess we're seeing them now. I mean, I mean, NSF is, of course, it's funding, you know, research, not immediate application, right? So that is, you know, sometimes we have to say, okay, this is as short term as we can make it, and we can point to some specific things that have been delivered, such as there's some of the widely used databases that pull together COVID numbers around the country were created with NSF funding, the software infrastructure. But I think, but in the end of the day, I have to say what we're doing now is sort of preparing for the next pandemic.
Thank you. And I see there are a bunch of junior faculty members out here. And so I would follow up on that one and ask, so this, are they, you know, the extra funding that was there and might have come from, you know, the last stimulus, is it a past program, or is there still funding for additional?
Yeah, so that's over. I mean, you can always apply for a single, you know, a rapid or an Eager. You just have to have the appropriate idea, read the application manual. But I said what I expect is for new faculty, if you get your career in this fall, because or this summer, I think the deadline's in August. But as I said, you know, we can't say anything. There's nothing definite. But if this new money is added through this big, you know, stimulus bill that's making its way through Congress, I think we can expect to see money for careers, and the other one we have is CRII, or it's for launching careers for people who've never held a federal grant and are basically from a smaller university where they don't get startup funds and they need some special help during their first couple of years.
Yep. And so and the other comment that you made was the relationship with NIH, and you know, I'm not asking you about what is coming because we don't know, but when we talk about especially research related to the pandemic, there is this borderline where whether it fits in NIH or it fits in NSF. And NIH has orders of magnitude, perhaps more funding than NSF. So how do you draw the line, and what type of research should go to NIH and what type of research should come to NSF?
Well, so we have a good model for this through what we call smart and connected health. So the idea for this is work that is a bit too applied for our regular robust intelligence program, but probably too researchy for what would be for NIH funding. So the progression that we've seen that's been successful is we might, you know, have researchers who've been historically funded by robust intelligence. They now are working with medical researchers, and they put in proposals of smart and connected health. In that program, they're reviewed by both agencies, and we pick some, and NIH picks some, and some we co-fund. And then we like to see it when their next piece of funding comes from NIH for a bigger award, what they call the R1 and R2 development awards, to really develop it to make it fully deployable, you know, and then to have clinical trials funded by NIH. I said the only issue there is that Smart and Connected Health has a very low success rate because it's such a broad program, lots of interests, just not enough money yet. And NIH though has sort of a new AI initiative. So they have an Office of Data Science Strategy, and they have a trans NIH AI initiative, and you can read about it like on the web, but it's all very, very new, right? So, and when we see what they wanted, where they want to go, we think that there could be more opportunities, but you know, it's going to take a little time, I think, to build that. And although NIH is very big, it's also like, you know, a little bit like steering a giant, you know, a giant ship. It takes a little while for it to move in new directions.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'll go to Dr. Iyer. You said that the DoD has not received any additional funding from these bills that have been passed to put in supplementary research funding, but the pandemic must have changed the focus of some research and the outlook to some extent with the DoD. So are there efforts on those lines, and any changes that are coming through with respect to what the focus is and what it should be and so on?
Okay, so when I said that funds, additional money wasn't allocated, I'm just saying that additional money wasn't allocated to me. So, you know, DoD is such a vast organization. So as it filters down, you know, I'm pretty sure DARPA got a ton of money, and they got explicitly, you know, COVID-related money. I know that for a fact. So within the Army, again, I mean, the Army Research Lab might have got some, but when it comes to basic research, I think, you know, the money didn't really make it. That said, there were definitely money made available for synthetic biology. So I think SynBio has now become incredibly important, and it's being pushed, you know, within DoD, especially within the Army. So yes, I mean, that's not quite AI, but I mean, that's an area that is seeing a lot of you know, get a lot of attention. Okay, so also one of the things that's happening is that AI per se might not be getting money, but so recently there was a BAA, a call for proposals for radio. I mean, it was, you know, ultra wide band gap materials for a terahertz frequency, you know, a radio frequency, so to say, and that had as a component. So essentially, this is work that there's work in material science. There's also work in semiconductors, but they wanted to bring in mining and you know, AI tools to be able to explore the vast the material space to get the kinds of properties that they were interested in. So things of this kind really, you know, really just did pop up. So, but then, you know, this is sort of a, you know, what is called as a center, and, you know, there would be 5 or 6 large Muri style, meaning about a couple of $1 million per year grants available, and then maybe about 10 smaller, you know, less than 500,000 per year grants. And, you know, all of these is supposed to work as a consortium to address the problem on hand. So, you know, all these things came up, but you know, the question is, would they have come up even if there was no COVID? I mean, it's hard to say, you know, my guess is that yes, they will still happen. So,
May I add a couple of points here?
go ahead.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe you weren't finished.
Oh, no, I'm done.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to, there was something that you just said, Dr. Iyer, that prompted me to mention to people that, you know, it is important to consider as a researcher, and I'm sure you already do this, but the fact that not every project has AI as its primary focus, but there is great potential in these intersectional projects and these interdisciplinary projects to be collaborating with other researchers across the university on programs and projects. For those of you who are at Penn State and are not familiar with it, I would direct you to the fact that we do have a website for the Office of Foundation Relations, and we do post their funding opportunities that are available. I've just put the link to that spreadsheet in the chat. We also post things to InfoReady, and when there is a down select to limited submissions. I would direct your attention, for those of you who are here, to the first item on the spreadsheet that I just sent from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, which is about diagnostic excellence and attempting to find, to increase diagnostic performance. And there is mention of some of the kinds of work that you might be doing. So that's, I think, another avenue for people to be considering. One other thing I didn't mention when I spoke is that there are an increasing number of organizations that are focusing much more specifically on AI and funding for it. I'm putting another in the chat, which is AI for Good. But another thing that we are also seeing is more competitions and challenges. And these are ones where you might in particular find yourselves working with a larger team of people seeking to solve a large, seemingly intractable problem, and applying AI to help find a solution to that problem. Many of these are being stood up by an organization called Lever for Change, which the MacArthur Foundation created when they did their 100 and Change challenge. But many of those challenges are continuing, and they're funded often by a collaboration of companies, foundations, and individuals, or in some cases solely by foundations or individuals or companies, or again, it can be a combination of those. So I think it really is important to remember what Dr. Iyer was saying is there are opportunities both for you individually, but in collaboration with others.
All right, thank you, Dr. Penney. Okay, so I will go ahead with a slightly different topic. We have been talking about, about funding and resources, which I think is the topic of the panel. But one of the things that we have seen with COVID is the incredible amount of collaboration that has happened across the scientific community. And that has been enabled by sort of rapid data sharing, open publications through archive, and so on. And some of this has been done just because people want to get something done quickly. But I also, personally, I believe that that's an opportunity for a model that perhaps the funding agencies could have a little bit of a say on, because what we saw is once the funding agencies wanted the data to be published along with the work, NIH has done some work in this area, then researchers were more willing to share their data and so on and so forth. So in the with respect to open publications and open data sharing, are there any thoughts on part of our funding agencies to make that, to catalyze that effort or to make things happen in that space? Because I guess I don't want to go back to the old days post-COVID.
Okay, so let me try and take a crack at that question. well, there are two things that I want to mention. One is that the Army Research Office and a number of the DoD funding agencies, ONR and AFOSR, run this program called Multi-Disciplinary University Research Initiative. And it has always been the case that these projects demand collaboration across multiple disciplines. And indeed, if it's, the idea is that if a program manager is going to get 2 people or 3 people in the same area who might go to the same conferences to work together in a problem, that's not good enough. The whole idea is to be able to get people that do not go to the same conferences, do not share, do not know that they share common interests, to come together and work on a large project. So we've always been encouraging this, and I think we'll continue to do so. The second point that I wanted to make is that within the social sciences, one of the things that I constantly keep hearing is that more than 50%, and I'm more closer to 60 or 70% of the results are not repeatable, right? So, science is very much dependent on reproducibility of the experimentation, so that you can have confidence in the inferences that are drawn. And if somebody says that a particular hypothesis does hold, that it indeed does hold. And of course, social science is an incredible, social science experiments are incredibly hard to create in the first place. And there are websites out there right now, and all of us that, I work with the social scientists, so I have some projects with them. So one of the things that we always sort of insist is that the protocol for the experiment be established in this website. That they put up an entry and sort of say, this is the hypothesis that we're working on. These are the conditions that we're going to be dealing with. This is our experimental setup. So that others, if they want to, they can also start it. Or at least, so that when the same group comes back later and says, I have these results, the data and everything else is sort of available to the community. So I think this is definitely going to happen more and more. And by the way, I hear similar things about the medical community too, which is that, biochemistry and especially biology, when the claim is that the experiments are not reproducible. But again, these are the kinds of situations where AI and mining and all these things can really play a part. So it's in that context that I hear about these sort of experimental setups. Over.
Thank you. So Dr. Penney, the foundations, one of the ways in which what we can do to encourage more open science is for the funding to come with certain terms that results should be shared and data should be shared and so on. Are there efforts that you see on those lines, or are these projects so narrow that they're more interested in sort of the impact in the field per se?
We see both, and it depends on the project. So in some cases, funders are interested in a very specific project and potential impact or outcome, or focusing on a particular area, and they are the ones funding the research, and they are the ones who will be holding the information. At the same time, where I would say we see what you just described and what Dr. Iyer was talking about is in these challenges and competitions. Almost all of the ones that we have come across that have anything to do with scientific research have in fact required that the PIs be willing to share the data, that this be open source. That's not to say there might not ever be one that will come where that circumstance would be different, But this is actually a point that we make when we do a presentation specifically about engaging in competitions and challenges and the pros and the cons and the things people need to think about before they choose to participate in one. Terms and conditions are one of the very first things we talk about, and the fact that PIs need to determine whether, for example, there is, they could commoditize their work down the road, and if they make it publicly available, what are the potential implications for that? On the other hand, there are programs and projects that lend themselves to being open source and where people are very comfortable with doing that. So that's one of the first things that we are encouraging people to have our research administration look at when one of these opportunities comes available.
Thank you. So Dr. Kautz, I know the NSF requires a data management plan and encourages open sharing and so on. But I think there is still a large, I think I share the point that Dr. Iyer mentioned with respect to the reproducibility of scientific results. And that's actually, in my limited experience, not only just valid for social sciences, but also valid for the computational sciences. My research is in natural language processing and AI, and oftentimes I see these methods which come funded by federal agencies where the code is not available and the data is not available, and if you write to people, you don't get it. This is in fact produced by federal money. Should the NSF not be requiring that code and data should be released publicly?
Well, I can't speak for all of NSF, but I completely agree. We try to maintain a relatively light hand on researchers and to follow the recommendations, the best practices of the community. And we certainly have seen a big movement in computer science conferences that are requiring results to include data sets, to include the code. So it is happening to, it certainly is improving, and the situation is already, of course, quite different than it is in much of, like, for example, biomedical research, where the results are really, you can't see them, until after, and you can never get the data because it's all protected data. If I think that if NSF decided to institute such a policy, I expect the computer science directorate would be quite happy to figure out how to make that work in the CS community. I said we just have to make sure that we don't inadvertently damage important professional societies, right? That's the, and there's some professional societies that, like IEEE, that do good, but they are reliant still on paid access to material. So I think that there's still some work to be done there. But I said I kind of feel like computer science is kind of already halfway there, well, where a lot of other areas, particularly biology, still have much more bigger challenge.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, there's something else that I want to add, if I may. So on one hand, I'm all for open, open data, open hypothesis, open statement of the hypothesis and validation, and so on and so forth. In the contracting world, there's something called the Bayh-Dole Act, passed around 95 or so, where essentially that's what, with all contracts, with all grants, that's what gives the intellectual property of your grants and of your contracts to the vendor. So essentially, if you are the person doing the work, then the intellectual property belongs to your university, right? And the data belongs to your university. It doesn't belong to you, by the way. So, I mean, essentially the laws are such that, you have complete control over it. The only question is, how do you sort of tease out the parts that should be made available to the public at large so that science can progress? I mean, and so this is sort of a balancing act. I mean, we want science to progress, but also people to be able to, including universities, to make money of the discoveries. So, over.
Thank you. That certainly it's an important point, and the issue has many facets and is complicated. So thank you for making those points. Since we are talking about AI, and we heard in the last panel, several panelists made the point that one of the biggest issues with respect to this pandemic, its response, and the government's actions and so on, is the unequal hits that have been suffered by certain parts of our society, especially the inequality, economically depressed parts, the rural areas, and so on. So are there efforts, and what they said is that we need to do this before the next pandemic, a lot of work. For example, the way we gather data, the way we solve problems or come up with policy and so on. So are there any changes that you know of that are coming in your agencies with respect to thinking about this issue and in preparing in advance so that we don't see these, or we can mitigate these things to some extent in the future? And when I say your organizations, it's your organizations for Dr. Kautz and Dr. Iyer, and in foundations in general, working towards these goals. So Dr. Penney, would you like to say a few words?
I would, thank you. Yes, the short answer to your question is yes, that foundations are increasingly doing precisely what you said. When I was thinking about this earlier, and an overarching theme really that has been true over the last probably 6 months or so that we've been in this pandemic, is this idea of AI for good, and all the work that we do being for good, and a much greater focus on dealing with inequities. And they are a focus. It is a focus on many of the areas that you have talked about. It's rural, it's urban, it's different racial groups, it's different economic groups, it's persons from an array of backgrounds, communities from an array of backgrounds. The Ford Foundation, for example, as a result of COVID-19, decided to actually go out and issue what they call a first of its kind social bond of $1 billion to support social justice and the social justice sector. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there, and they intend to extend their commitment to that. There are other major foundations that have taken a similar path. I do not see this abating anytime soon on the part of the foundation world. If anything, I think that this may accelerate and continue to spread. I say that in part because we are members of the university. We're associate members of the Council on Foundations. So I do have the opportunity to access the newsletters and other materials that they issue. And I see the very topics that you're talking about be central to many of the conversations that are being had. The other thing that I would say is that while there are any number of projects specifically designed to and purposefully funded to address inequity, what I've also seen over the past years is foundations increasingly also asking if a project is about some other topic, still how might it impact diverse communities. So for example, if you were looking at a particular disease and you're not necessarily looking at it and its impact on only persons from one background, asking a researcher to talk about how this work might apply to other communities and other groups. So there is more of that transpiring, and I do anticipate that this will continue. I would say too, in regard to that this is not only the effect of the pandemic. There's been a sea change occurring in philanthropy, and it was happening before the pandemic ever took place. It's partly a generational shift. It's partly because of the way fundraisers approach our work. And we've spent more time asking donors what they want. That might include a foundation, not just an individual. And they're telling us, and they're asking us to meet their expectations and their hopes. And I think this will, and funders want to be more deeply engaged and directly involved and to see a very specific impact. So I don't think this is going to change any. I think this will only accelerate, particularly given that millennials, who are a rising generation and taking on leadership in more and more organizations, really want to see the direct impact of their philanthropy and the work that they're doing. So as they start foundations, they're looking for that kind of activity.
Thank you. Dr. Kautz.
So the NSF has for many years had a lot of work on encouraging broader participation, starting all the way back in the high school, through university level, CS for all. I mentioned the career initiation grants, which really go to, I said, smaller colleges and universities. We have a program on called MSI, Minority Serving Institutions, where we actually are sort of put aside special money to make sure that the institutions that are in that category that have large Hispanic or African American contingents are successful in awards. So we have a lot of efforts, but I would say that those are almost orthogonal to the impact of COVID, in the sense that what COVID has shown is that there's a different kind of diversity that really has not gotten enough attention. And that is the diversity of what we might call our PhD supply chain. That for computer science, we've got to a point where about 70% of all of our incoming PhD students were from China and India. And then if you look at the new faculty, that 70% of new faculty come from China and India. And when you have a situation like COVID that shuts down the supply chains, that shuts down the PhD pipeline. And so what we are starting to realize is, we actually need some diversity in terms of getting domestic students into PhD programs. We're at an all-time record of undergraduate bachelor's degrees, like 55,000 new bachelor's degrees a year in computer and information science, and about 200 domestic students go into PhD programs in computer science. The rest are from overseas. And so we realize, we do need to have sort of a more resilient education system, and we also think this is good for many reasons. Good for the country, good for having people support universities as well. We have a program we announced recently called CS Grads for US. The idea is that, well, the original concept was that every student who got a CS undergraduate degree with a high enough GPA could get an NSF a fellowship from size for graduate school. Well, we couldn't afford that. So instead we're doing a pilot where students who graduated 2 to 4 years ago and have been working and are starting to think about going back to graduate school can apply and to get a scholarship that would be like our own version of a GRFP, a graduate fellowship that would make them more attractive to universities and would give them more confidence in applying. So I think we need to do a lot more, both on the supply side of figuring out how to talk to students, make them understand the advantages of getting a PhD in computer science, understand how actually being a computer science graduate student, it's not a life of poverty. It's actually a pretty nice, life. And then, especially when you factor in the amount of money you make in your summer internships, my students all typically made, so they get like a $35,000 stipend, then another $20,000 over the summer as an intern, and all of these various kind of subsidized lifestyle you get as a graduate student, and then they step into a job with a salary of $300,000 to $400,000 starting. So if that was well known, I think we'd have a lot more of those 55,000 students applying. But we also need to work on the pull side, is that we see an enormous variance in how serious universities and departments are about trying to proactively recruit domestic students. There's a really nice study that recently came out from the Computing Research Association that's starting to look at that, and we're interested in helping them look at it further. I said some schools seem to be, really be very proactive and really reaching into the domestic pool and into the domestic minority pool, the Native American, Hispanic, African American, and other schools just don't seem to care. But we think that actually people always care about money, so we could be maybe doing a bit more, both to help educate department leaders as well as in the way funding works. That why, for example, I can't say again, nothing's been decided, but maybe we could actually give better, bigger awards for domestic students that are supported by grants. So who knows? A lot of things to think about.
Yeah, a quick follow up on that last point. So I was curious. I saw that ad in the program, the Grads for CS, and I was curious as to why you or the institution chose the 2 to 4 year. They have to be out for 2 to 4 years, because I actually went into industry for 5 years, and then it was hard to take a pay cut from 100K to 25K at that time. So if they're already there in industry, and it's a hard transition to make. So instead, if you would actually allow students who are continuing, 0 to 4 years perhaps, or 0 to 3 years or 2 years, if you cannot afford as many. I was interested in that one.
Yeah, there was a working group that looked at a lot of different alternatives. A part of it is that if a student knows they want to go to graduate school, they can generally, if they are well motivated and well prepared, they can get in. So what we really thought was needed is a program where you would apply for, and you would get, in addition to the money, you actually would get 1 to 2 years of mentorship about how to prepare to apply to a graduate program and what's it about. And we don't expect everybody then who enters the program. Some of them might learn more and decide, okay, that really isn't for them. And so to do that for students right out, I think we would need to be figuring out a way to reach into the undergraduate population. The group kind of ran some numbers, and they said, just without any additional resources, what could we afford? Because we would be a little bit, scared to take on, to get all these applications and then only be able to fund a few percent of them. So what they did is they sort of looked at the size of this group and did some estimates about how many would take us up, so that we can feel, you know, confident that, you know, maybe we can have a 25% success rate, you know, as opposed to just a few percent. But of course, it makes absolute sense to start even earlier in the pipeline.
Yeah, and on those, I mean, you alluded to a couple of things that, so we have, like every other university, we have faced the same problem. Last year, we mitigated the risks to some extent by actually looking at, for the first time perhaps, where the person is located physically, and making a lot more offers than we actually wanted students. Because as you know, a significant number of our teaching assistants are usually from international students. 70% of our students are from China. So we mitigated that risk last year, and this year we have tried to diversify that. And so I think this year we made offers to more students from India and a few other places, but now India is also in the same pool. So it is always a risk. And with respect to that, as the Associate Dean for Research in our college, what I've tried to see if we can sort of grow our own students. And one of the things that I have focused on, it's a program in progress, and we'll see how far we can go, is undergraduate research. And I have, you know, my only domestic student was an undergraduate in my class, and then he got motivated and so on, and has continued to a PhD. So are there plans or efforts, or is the NSF thinking about enhancing or strengthening the undergraduate research in the country?
Absolutely, yeah. So we already put a lot of money. We have both our REU Research for Experience for Undergraduate Sites program, and we're talking about ways to expand that. You know, and also one of the things that we actually never did, we discovered nobody actually was tracking what happened to the REU students afterward. And so we actually have now are deploying a system so that once a student is in the system as having applied, we can would be able to hopefully track them all the way through their careers. You know, because that's not like we're going to do it secretly, it's just actually keeping that information and then contacting them and getting updates. So we can really measure the effectiveness. We also, as faculty all know, REU supplements, I can't think of, we spent an awful lot, many millions of dollars on REU supplements. Sometimes I've argued that, well, maybe REUs should be built into every award. There's been some pushback saying, well, you know, we don't want professors who really don't want to mentor students to be forced to do it because they'll do a bad job. But I think that's going to be part of the whole change of education, is you realize that we don't need faculties to deliver lectures anymore. We need the faculty that you can get. If you just want a nice polished lecture, let's get those, you know, those can be delivered, you know, through video. Let's really have the faculty working with the students. I know at my own university, Rochester, almost half of the undergraduates carry out REUs, either formal or informal, with their faculty and mentors. And I think we can really see that this is the future of education. Is this will just become what you know, especially the you know, third and fourth year of education should be. That should be like, you know, a very large part of the curriculum.
Thank you. Dr. Iyer?
Yeah, I was wondering if there's anything for me to say after what Henry just said. I think there are only 2 points that I'd like to make. One is that I think around 2005, 2007, what I used to see was that incredibly large efforts, these were called cooperative technology alliances. These were sort of $150 million programs over 10 years in robotics and network science and other things that the Army was involved in. We had a requirement that 5% of the money should go to minority institutions. I think then somebody found some, a way of interpreting the the statutes so that they said, no, that's not necessary. Or there were, I think there were some court cases, and all those things went away. But what is now happening in the past 3-4 years, what I'm seeing is both from the Office of Secretary of Defense, which has this thing called research initiation programs and research equipment program, only for minority institutions, and these are being pushed at a major level. And the dollar amounts are going up, and the number of awards are going up. So the second, within that stream, I also want to mention that the Army itself has been setting up centers of excellence. For instance, recently, Howard University was set up as a center of excellence for AI. And the idea is that these HBCU MI institutions should be sort of brought into the fold by having centers where there is sort of a core group of faculty that are doing research, and they're engaging students, and then all these people are working with the labs. Along the same strain, along the same sort of direction, I want to mention that there is a program that is that's about to come out, and this is directed at faculty at HBCU schools and minority institutions. The idea is that somebody, an assistant professor who is within the first 2 years, can apply. And this is a program where they would get funding to do research locally, and then get some amount of money to go do research at a R1 institution, so that they are part of an ecosystem of research. Instead of telling them, yeah, here's the money, go do research, when their own environment might not be rich enough to support that research. So we want to get them out of it. And so therefore, the idea is that they go spend 6 months at an R1 institution, and their entire salary being paid for, so that they get released from the teaching duties and then go to research. And importantly, another important component is that the same faculty also comes to gets to come and spend some time at the DoD labs, the Army Research Lab, for instance. So the BAA should be out pretty soon, those are the kinds of things that I'm seeing happening. And I think both the generals and the people at the top the sort of the top echelons of the Army are recognizing that it is necessary to create a culture and to create a sort of a workforce at the minority institutions, which would go waste otherwise. Good. So this is one major theme that I wanted to talk about, and there was another theme that I wanted to touch upon. And I don't want to add anything to what Henry was said about the pipeline and so on and so forth. I mean, all of that is well and good, and it's true, and there are things that need to happen to get U.S. students into grad schools, and all of that is there. But there is also another force that is going to come into play pretty soon. Within the government, and especially within DoD, there is now a greater sort of, I don't want to call it appreciation, there's great concern about research protection. So we're now, this is happening at higher levels. There are discussions going on about how 6.1 research should be promoted, but yet kept out of our adversaries' hands. I mean, this is a hard question, and this is an entirely difficult problem to solve. But nevertheless, if you don't raise it, if it is not, if people don't put their heads together to solve it, I think the nation would suffer. When I was a graduate student in the early 80s, not all grants, but I knew some of the grants were things that I, as a foreign student, could work on. I'm afraid we will come back to sort of a similar situation. Again, that is the trajectory that I expect. Whether it pans out or not, I don't know. So I think that is also going to impact, and definitely I think that's going to impact universities where they're going to have to scramble to get graduate students that are local.
Yep.
Okay, that's it. Nothing else to say.
Thank you. And since this is about AI and COVID, I have a question related to ethics and social responsibility and similar things. So, I mean, I'm not concerned about, as yet, about the Frankenstein stories you hear, but I do believe, and the community does believe, that ethical considerations, fairness, and so on, and social responsibility should be a first order object. For example, I think I'm pretty sure both the NSF and the DoD requires environmental, sort of an environmental check for certain types of projects to see that there's no environmental damage being done and so on before that project goes through. So in your mind, do you think that there should be some such checks beyond what happens in IRB, which I have found our IRB institutions not that well equipped to actually check ethical issues related to AI research? And as we are going into cutting edge AI, should the funding agencies require such checks related to AI? So I will go with Dr. Iyer. Yeah.
Yeah, within DoD, there is now a subcommittee of the IRB, at least the Army's IRB, or the Army's HARPO, which is the Human Research Protection Office, which is essentially looking at this. So, which is asking the question: do we just wave our wand and say, "Yep, all AI projects are fine; they are sort of minimal risk"? Or do we really need to look a little bit deeper? So this subcommittee is coming up with recommendations on what the HARPO checks have to be. And of course, those requirements will get then translated to IRBs having to produce the appropriate documentation to ensure fairness and so on and so forth. It's going to happen. And I think with the next few weeks, I expect to get calls where the subcommittee is going to talk to me and a whole bunch of others on what the issues are. So yes, we are aware of it. Yes, it's going to happen.
Thank you. So that question needs to be a little bit modified for Dr. Penney, which is, are foundations looking into this and asking for these types of things? I think in a lot of cases, they do ask for environmental checks and certifications where they're funding, let's say, buildings and things like that. So in this case, are they aware, and are they going to be doing things in this area before funding projects?
It's not one that I've heard a lot about, but I would fully anticipate that what Dr. Iyer described is the same sort of thing you'll see on the part of foundations. I mean, there is a deep concern, as I mentioned earlier, in the profession in general, or maybe I didn't mention it, but there's a lot of debate in the profession right now in fundraising and philanthropy about the degree to which philanthropy may do good or do harm. And there is discussion about the use of tools, whatever they may be, and engagement of communities, et cetera, et cetera. And so, anytime, obviously, as you've pointed out, when you have a project that employs AI, you need to be sure that it's doing so in a fair, free, and open way that will enable gathering data that doesn't exclude people who might be answering a question and thus helping to come to a solution. So I suspect we will see that. I haven't seen it so far, but I suspect we will.
Thank you. Dr. Kautz?
Well, actually, I think that the major points have already been made by the other speakers. I'll pass on this one. I see we only have about 4 minutes left. Oops.
Yeah, we do have about 4 minutes left. So we'll go with Dr. Kautz. Any closing statements, if you can do it in a minute?
Okay, well, so well, just to those people who stuck it through this far on the webcast, that ideas, although our major job is like we get your proposals and review them, but if you have ideas for work, particularly that's you might think doesn't fit into one of our current programs, we really encourage you to make a contact with one of our program directors who can offer advice. Might think of programs you haven't thought of that aren't as well publicized, or other mechanisms. So I said we're happy to talk and love to talk about things that aren't just about that aren't just about complaints about you not getting your grant funded.
Thank you. Dr. Penney. Oh, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I've just appreciated the opportunity to be here. I think I don't have anything more to offer. I will put into the chat though, I just close with noting the opportunity that I just mentioned to you in a private chat that we have posted to info ready right now. This is for the Alfred Sloan Foundation, and one that does require work with minority serving institutions, but it's specifically focused on bringing more students into STEM graduate education programs. So I will, I'll leave you all with that opportunity that is currently open. So.
Thank you. And the last word goes to Dr. Iyer.
Oh, thank you for giving me this opportunity, and good luck to everyone. So for the faculty out there, reach out to us. We are pretty much it's pretty much a small world. We know each other, so even though we might not be able to promote your ideas and invite a proposal, there are others that we know, AFOSR, ONR, or even Henry Kautz, and say go talk to them, or one of Henry Kautz's colleagues. So it's a small world, and we get to hear about opportunities that are constantly coming. So we'll be glad to talk to you. And by the same token, if I ask you to review a proposal, please review it for me. You'll be in my good books. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank 3 of our panelists for coming here and spending the time and giving us a lot of things to think about. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, so we'll have a minute break and then close, or we might just close. Yeah, Amelia, you would like to say something?
Yes. Thank you everybody for making it to the end. I certainly learned a lot, and hope to have more such events in the future.
Yeah, thank you. And so, yeah, thanks again to everyone for attending and staying on thus far. We had a good set of talks related to, I think, all aspects, several aspects of AI and its use in agent-based systems, and work with the Pennsylvania Department of Health. We had 3 very interesting and engaging panels, which talked all about AI approaches for COVID-19, our government responses, epidemiology, drug discovery, and finally, with respect to funding. So thanks, everyone, and take care. We would love to hear from you. You know where to reach us, send us an email. And if you want to engage with the center more, we would welcome your participation.